Broadcasting live from the Phoenix Business RadioX studio in Tempe, Arizona. You are tuning in to Culture Crush with Kendra Maples. This podcast will dive into a variety of companies that are crushing it with a great company culture.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Culture Crush Business Podcast. On this podcast, we focus on everything surrounding businesses with a good company culture. We deep dive with company leaders to learn more about how they're crushing it and building great culture. And we also deep dive with the resources that are out there to really go in and help businesses improve. So that is actually the focus that we're going to have today. I have two amazing individuals that fit into that category of being a resource to help improve company culture. Before we jump in and dive in, I do want to give a shout out to our sponsor. Our sponsor, Gateway Bank, they've just been phenomenal supporting the growth of all of this. And they're a company that has a great culture. So obviously a great win there. With Gateway Bank, they are a company bank here in Arizona that specializes in serving small businesses across the valley and the country. So we are so excited to have them as that sponsor and that partner. When you work with Gateway, you don't have to call a 1-800 number for support or submit a loan application and then wait forever before you get an answer. You get fast personal service from a team who knows you and cares about you. Whether you need a loan or banking services for your business, Gateway is truly there to help. Visit gcbaz.com/Culture Crush for details and a free consultation with Bank President James Christensen. He will probably have on some very snazzy Converse shoes when you have that conversation as well. We love him and the culture he is growing. So now let's jump into this conversation. I have two amazing guests that I get to have this conversation with today and deep dive with. One of which I've gotten to know a little bit over the last year, and she was actually a speaker at one of our events, and we'll mention that. And then another that I had the opportunity to meet through various connections, which is one of the great things I love about this space that I'm in with culture. Both, like I said, are resources that go into the companies and help the companies grow. So today we have Jonathan Bennett, executive coach with Clearly Then. Welcome.
Hey, it's great to be here.
And we have Amy Looper, the founder and the CEO of Resilient Growth. Welcome.
Thank you, Kendra.
So I'm going to jump in first with Jonathan. Jonathan, you're virtual with us today. And I want you to just take a few moments, share with our audience and our listeners about you, what you do, and how you got to where you are in this space of helping build culture.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for having me, Kendra. It's great to be here. I'm coming to you from Ontario, Canada, where out of the blue, it's boiling hot here today. So I know I'm speaking to folks in Arizona like we know anything about heat, but it happens to be super sweltery here today. So a little bit about me. I am an executive coach. I help leaders across North America, founders, CEOs, build great companies. I've got a background as a management consultant. I founded a company that grew steadily over the course of a decade, and we became a B Corp, and we served nonprofits all across Canada. I am kind of obsessed with workplace culture, creating psychological safety, accountable teams. These are all things that mean a lot to me and a lot to my clients. And so I can't wait for this conversation.
Yes. And this is why we're friends, because we both get to geek out about company culture. I also think it's hilarious that it's hot there today. We just really wanted you to feel like you were here in Arizona in the heat. So I'm glad that the temperature turned up for you. Before we jump in with Amy introducing herself, tell us a little bit more about Laraday, the company that you had started and grown, and then I believe stepped away and sold so that you could then do this. Tell us a little bit about that.
It all started because I was on the senior team of a big, huge hospital here in Canada. And I just became really exhausted, totally burnt out. It was an amazing experience, and I learned a ton from an enormous portfolio and a huge institution that I was helping to lead at the time. But I just knew something was different and needed to be different for me, I should say. And so I just one day took the brave leap and I quit. And I decided that the next thing I really wanted to do was serve nonprofit organizations. I felt they were really poorly served by management consultants at the time. I had had a lot of experience in that sector and healthcare and social services leading up to the time before at the hospital. And so I decided to hang out a shingle and I just kind of went for it. And it was great, amazing experience. I won some work and then I won some more work. And then I added somebody and I added somebody else. And I was like, oh my God, I think I'm growing a company. Does anybody know how you do this? So it found me a little bit in that journey of scaling that company and really creating focused services and really being able to become the kind of place that I always dreamed about working myself. We became a B Corp, a social purpose company. All of those things led me to really dive into the whole world of how do you create a good workplace culture that's safe and what do people need and how can that vary. It's really an evolving topic. So I remain fascinated by it. After about 10 years, I got to a point in my life. I primarily we did strategic plans. We did a lot of management training, but I kind of did a lot of the strategic plans. And I just sort of got to a point where it's like one more strategic plan and I'm gonna die. Like I just had done so many of them, and so I thought, I can feel myself naturally getting to the end. Had an amazing young woman coming through the company through the ranks, and I just kind of knew she was the next CEO. So we did some succession planning and I was able to ultimately sell the company. So we did a management buyout, which felt really organic and kind of a beautiful thing. That company continues to do amazing work under really great leadership, and she's taking it to new and different places. And it was a bit of an emotional ride for me, but I learned a ton about myself and about how to do all of those things. And they're the kinds of things that I like to help my clients with now.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. That's going to connect a little bit with Amy as well. There was a very brave leap in your work in corporate and then transitioning into you building your own business. And Jonathan, like you said, sometimes these things happen and you kind of just know and you feel that they're happening. That's literally how I started this business with Culture Crush. It started as this podcast and having conversations with company leaders and resource partners. And then over time, connecting with more and more resource partners to the point where companies started to ask and say, hey, Kendra, do you have a resource for diversity and inclusion? Or do you have a resource for mental health support in the workplace? And it was like, well, yeah, I've talked with all of these people. I've built this. Let's see if we can really put some meat to this and build this hub. And now we have this hub of over 250 partners that we can connect companies with to really go in and do the deep work. So it doesn't have to be the same person that is doing the operations plan that's also giving you and your team mental health and grief support. Like those are two different skills, right? And so now to your point too, it's been crazy to build the business on the back end and go, oh, it's a business. We're doing things. So I really appreciate you for sharing that because it all connects in together. Okay. Now I want to jump to Amy. Amy, I am so thrilled to have you in the studio. We had the opportunity, I actually had you as a speaker for the second event that I ever did with Culture Crush. So it was really beautiful. I knew your story. You had your book that you were writing. And so connecting you into that space. And now I'm like, oh, this is a perfect conversation to match to talk about really what you do and how you go in, you work with companies and the growth of you. So I'm throwing it to you now. Tell us about you and all the things.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having. Well, so like Jonathan, I do coaching. Personal development is something that I never thought I was going to get into, but it really was through my own burnout experience. I was in corporate sales for over 18 years, won lots of awards and, very accomplished in that field. And then, going through life trials as a woman, becoming a parent, becoming a mom, like there were lots of personal traumas from that I didn't realize needed to be healed from. And
Mhm.
so what resulted was what I thought was corporate burnout. But really underneath, 3 to 4 layers underneath that was really the personal experiences that just needed to be healed.
Mm.
So instead of continuing on, I actually got fired from the top cybersecurity company in the world. And I love telling people this story because it was when I was vulnerable enough in that space to say, hey, I'm experiencing some big anxiety here, despite top performance, despite, booking over $1 million in sales in my first quarter of this company and just crushing it sales wise. But internally, I went to my boss and I said, this isn't working, and like, I need some help here.
Mhm.
But instead of actually getting help, it was turned, the tables were turned and then ended up getting terminated. And so it was like, okay, I'm so glad we're talking about now psychologically safe environments. So I'm on a mission to really help
Mm.
women, to help people in the sales community, in the corporate communities, to create these places where we can grow and we can foster really authentic connections in the workplace, because we're all here on a mission.
Yeah. So when you are working with companies, now that, and Jonathan, you can chime in too. I feel like at least we're having these conversations a little bit more than we were at that time
Yeah.
when you were let go.
Hmm.
Um, we're talking about these things of, hey, I do feel anxiety. I do feel stressed. Here's some other things that's going on at home, and how do I tackle and balance all of the things, and especially in your case,
Hmm.
the motherhood piece.
Hmm.
Um how do these conversations start, and how do these conversations go now when it's the two of you going into a business and helping them? Like, when are they bringing you in? Are they bringing you in, for a lack of better terms, when there's that oh shit moment in the company? We have a kiddo in the room. Plug your ears. What does that look like? Talk me through what it looks like, and if you feel like this is a conversation that's happening more than it was in the past. And
Mm.
either one of you, take it away.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, in my experience, people are bringing me in when they need help
Mhm.
versus, people bring me in the corporate space for the speaking, for the events,
Mm.
for the education. And then sometimes we can go further from there. But I would say, in my experience working with high tech companies, primarily in the Fortune 100 space, we're seeing a lot of folks try to put some effort forth, but I think there's still a disconnect in trying to carry that through long term
Mm.
to into their teams and really implementing it in a deep way.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
But the start is there.
The start is definitely there. Yeah,
Okay.
which is great. I mean, for high tech companies and the companies I've worked with, this wasn't a thing that they even tackled 5 years ago, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think some of it's generational. I think
Mhm.
that we've got a whole new generation coming to the workforce right now that has been in therapy,
Yeah.
that isn't scared of talking about mental health. And so I'll be coaching a CEO, and then I find myself with their VPs, and suddenly I've kind of got the team. And then they send me further down into the organization sometimes, and I'll find myself with a younger manager. And the opening gambit is, well, I have ADHD and this, that, and like, people they're just so open to
Mm.
talking about where they're at. That hasn't filtered up yet
Mm.
as much, and so that's, I think, what Amy's saying. I see that too, Amy. Like, I think that there's I typically get brought in when there's some, let's just say there's an inflection point,
Yes.
like they're having a
Yeah.
problem and they need
Yeah.
help. But then, when folks are kind of a bit younger, they know how to scaffold, and they'll use me as a coach to support them. Like, I've just got this big new job. I've been promoted. I've never been a CEO before. I've never been a VP before. I have nothing wrong today, but obviously something's going to happen. Could I have a coach? And they'll work with me, and we can kind of do the slow burn. And
Mhm.
that's a completely different journey, eh? Amy, do you have that when you go with somebody kind of almost like proactively? It's a completely different experience.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. it's all about the intention behind it too, right? If you're
Mm,
proactive, people are much more, they're saying, raising their hand saying, "Hey, I want change," right? It's that human behavior and that change management for sure.
And if you're seeing this change, Jonathan, you mentioned this, maybe not at the C-suite level, but from the generation that's in this middle management and building up, what are you doing to then help those C-suite levels? What are some of these other challenges that you're facing when you're working with them? If especially if they have a team that is more open and being more honest and transparent about, "Hey, I'm going to therapy. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm
okay.
learning." Now I'm at the workplace
Mhm.
and my CEO doesn't understand any of this. How do you go in and support from both angles? This middle manager that's growing and trying to be open, and maybe this C-suite level that just maybe doesn't understand any of this.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think about it like closing a gap. I
Mhm.
really do, like a translation and trying to help younger folks understand how long Gen Xers had to wait to
Mhm.
get to the C suite. They had
Mhm.
to wait forever for boomers to retire. And they finally have. And they waited forever under a certain set of rules. And then they finally hit the corner office. That's the only rule book they've ever known. And it doesn't work anymore,
Mhm.
or it doesn't work in the same way that it used to. And so just helping that middle management layer have some empathy for where their leaders are at. I'll tell you a funny story. I had a professional services firm have me call me up, and I did some coaching with them. And they said, "Hey, Jonathan, our staff would like a presentation, a workshop on psychological safety in the workplace. But actually, as leadership, we'd like a presentation and a workshop on accountability. Can you do that?" And I was like, ah, I think
Therein
there's something
lies.
going on there.
Yeah.
So I set myself a bit of a challenge. I was like, okay, are these two sides of the same coin? I think in a way they are.
Mhm.
And so as you unpack psychological safety, the ability to be able to speak your truth in the workplace, not have any fear of retribution, being able to have an idea, good, bad, or indifferent, and say it aloud, all those sorts of things. And then you couple that with accountability for yourself, accountability for your team,
Mm.
accountability to the company or the organization as a whole. You marry those two things together, you can't really have one without the other
Yeah.
well.
Mhm.
And so that's really kind of like it's that just sort of like funny request actually sparked a bunch of thinking for me around these two sort of topics, and I'll often see them come together. And it's just funny when you see senior leadership wanting to do two, folks understand underneath saying but it's not safe, and it's like both sides have weaponized the thing that they don't want. And the trick is to bring it all together, right?
Yeah. So then what did you end up doing? Did you marry the two into one presentation that you were able to give to everybody, or how
I
did that look
I
like?
did.
Yeah?
Yeah, I did. I kind of definitionally unpacked them both. We did some workshops, so we did some experiential learning,
Mhm.
and I was, a little bit tricky. I kind of tried to trick senior management into understanding psychological safety, and I tried to trick the rest of the company into understanding accountability and its various forms. Like
Yeah.
when people hear accountability, they think it's being done to them, but actually, of course, there's a lot of personal accountability for your work. There's
Mhm.
accountability to the people that you work with in your team, and then there's, on some level, an accountability to the success of the organization. And somewhere between all those things is safety. And you have to feel like the organization cares about you, that your boss cares about you, that your teammates care about you. To me, those things really, they do actually marry quite well together.
Yeah.
Mhm. And I'm glad you said that, where there is kind of this level of trickery when we are working with companies. And I've had a similar situation with going in with the company. They reach out to us thinking, okay, this is the thing. Like, this is the thing we need to work on. For example, a lot of times it's DEI. Oh, we have to work on DEI. I'm like, that's great. Do you even know what the initials stand for? Let's start there. Right. And then we figure out it's not actually DEI, it's something connected to it, but maybe their board has decided that this is the thing they need to
Yeah.
work on, right? So going in and working with the company on these DEI initiatives and then bringing in all these other pieces that they're not even really seeing. And what you did, right? Marrying the two of the accountability piece and the education of that, the psychological safety piece, the education of that. And Amy, I know that's part of what you've done and also your journey in all of this.
Right.
So, Amy, let's go with you with what you had gone through in a company that was not supporting you
Mhm,
in that psychological safety space. And now what you're doing working with companies.
mhm.
What does that really look like when a company is truly, and Jonathan, for you too, when a company is truly supporting their staff? And Jonathan, you mentioned a few examples, but what does that really look like?
Well, I think it goes back to Jonathan, you had mentioned accountability. And when I hear accountability, especially personal accountability, personal congruence and leadership really come to mind. And when leadership is really on a mission to, create a culture that is filled with well-being and to have all levels of leadership really, marching to the same vision, then they're able to really get more buy-in and they're really willing to, open up lines of communication and no longer have these tiers where people don't feel like, they can really be themselves and authentic.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And so I think that's the first step. And that's usually the first step I usually look at too of, oh gosh, if we're going to come in and do services, is this going to be really effective or is it going to be a check mark?
Mm-hmm.
Because the last thing I think any of us service providers want to do is be the check mark. We want to really impact change and culture.
Mm-hmm. And that accountability piece, it really is both sides and connected to the whole
Mhm.
psychological safety piece because you have to be accountable for yourself to even try to speak up. You can't necessarily grow a culture that is safe and allows them the opportunity to
Yeah.
listen and share if the staff members are not even willing to try, right? So
Yeah.
there's all angles of this. The C-suite, the managers, everybody on one end listening, and then the accountability piece of everybody else with a risk factor
Yeah.
of, okay, well, I'm going to share this. And-
Yeah.
Yeah.
And oh, go ahead, Jonathan.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, I think sometimes it gets sort of decoupled in the minds of especially leaders. Like somehow there's this workplace culture thing over here, and there's this psychological safety or this DEI thing over here.
Mhm.
But anyway, we're here to make money and like grow the company. So like, if we have to do this, then fine. But like,
Yeah.
when can we get back to the point?
Yeah.
And I just think that is like the wrong way to think about it.
Mhm.
They're inherently intertwined.
Mhm.
Performance goes up when people feel like they are safe, when people feel like they're seen and
Mhm.
heard. Creativity goes up. You can drive results
Yeah.
and you can talk all about the performance of the company and be safe at the same time.
Yeah.
And so that, I don't know whether, Amy, if you come across that a little bit, but there's sort of a resistance to even like, how do
Yeah.
if I can kind of like take these things, bring in a consultant, have a half day workshop and, we're great. And as the CEO or the C-suite, we don't really even need to engage with it because we gave them what they wanted and what's on, Instagram.
Exactly. I couldn't agree with you more, and I think so, yes. I mean, all of the work of creating culture, creating psychological safety where people are really feeling like they belong, right?
Yes.
It's that feeling of sense of belonging, not even just heard. And what I oftentimes see people will say, well, we surveyed them, but
Ugh.
nobody takes the survey. Well, okay, well, yeah. And when's the last time you went out and talked to people? So it comes back to being connected. And I think, in the
Yeah.
pandemic, obviously, we had some issues with that globally, right? But now we can have an intentionality to really go over and beyond and really have deep connection because when we're vulnerable as leaders, that is the door to connection where
Mm.
we can have those kind of conversations and then people over time. And again, I think to your point, Jonathan, it's like it's not just a workshop. It's not just an
Mm.
hour. It's a path of culture building that doesn't happen overnight.
Mm-hmm. And if you have those C-level that, like you're saying, Jonathan, hey, we did the workshop, we gave them what they wanted, but you don't have the connection
Yeah.
piece, then nothing is going to grow and build still. I worked for a company in the past, and my role, I was overseeing the teams and kind of operations, procedures, and whatnot. And we were trying to set up a training day. And our CEO kept saying, okay, I want to do it on a Wednesday afternoon. I was like, hey, you have a lot of single parents.
Mm-hmm.
It's early release in Arizona on Wednesdays. Afternoon is horrible. Can't we just start in the morning? Like, why can't we just start it at 9 a.m. when they get here? Why does it have to be the afternoon? That's what he wanted for his schedule. And so I kept having to say, yes, and again, Wednesday, early release, you have single parents. Like, let's try and work this around a decent handful of people that you have on your staff. And he was blown away by this whole situation I was trying to accommodate and build. And he was also blown away by the fact that I knew we had single parents that had kids that had early release. And then there's me. I'm just connected with everyone. I'm like, yeah, but how do you not know this? Like, how do you not know these pieces? These are very simple pieces about your staff, but it was the connected piece.
Yeah.
The staff had that with me. They did not have it with him. So then you have this interesting level of psychological safety and support when you don't have it from everybody, but you maybe have it with some. How does that factor into the culture and into the conversations and into the work that you both are doing when maybe there is this level of safety and openness and connection with some and not everybody?
I think that's where that personal transformation comes in with leaders, because so many times people have risen to the top, to the C-suite, because they are high achievers, because they are driven, because they're, go, 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 go. And sometimes over many years of doing that, it becomes a disconnection between mind and body, between the ability to really feel connected to other people, listen and slow down because they are doing so much. And so that's where I think there's people like Jonathan and I will go in and work with leaders, and we're working on that deep transformational work, which also has a ripple impact on their health and their personal lives. And when they're doing the work, when they're unlocking to their highest level of performance and connection and all those kind of things, then we oftentimes see the culture follow suit. So I think it starts at the top.
It's hard for some folks too. I mean, culturally, maybe they didn't, talk about these things like, feelings or where even they're at in their world. Like they've not been curious about how they show up.
Yeah.
They suddenly get into the C-suite and people are talking about, I don't know, stuff like executive presence, or they've got Gen Zs who are going, just bad vibe on that guy, and so, then they show up in our coaching practice, say, Amy, and you're like, I coach a lot of women, but like when I coach men, they play this game and I'm like, so, how did that make you feel? And they're like, sorry? I'm like, feel,
Yes.
like, give me a feeling word. And then
Feeling.
they'll just describe it back to me like I didn't hear them correctly. So then I no, like a feeling, like actual word. And honestly, I swear, sometimes I'm like, okay, so I'm going to give you 5 feelings. I want you to pick one. Sad, happy, angry, disappointed. Disappointed. That was it. I'm like, good. We just did it. Look at that.
Get
But
a
like,
sticker.
it's just some personality types, some professions naturally draw. I was with a room full of engineers this morning. This is probably why this is on my mind. And, some professions just naturally draw people into them that have certain personalities that aren't naturally drawn to this sort of stuff. But it is hard to be successful as a leader in today if you're not doing some personal development work, if you can't communicate with your employees in the way that Amy's talking about. I just think it's kind of like table stakes now.
Yeah. A few things I want to note from what you said. One, I love you talking about the feelings thing. We had a few gentlemen on the podcast maybe a month or two ago, literally talking about feminine, masculine energy and becoming this version of masculine 2.0 and having the opportunity and learning how to share the feelings, right? And you mentioned industries. I think about more on the blue collar side, right? Construction, cars, Karen and Stephanie in the studio, they've heard me say this 1,000 times, but my dad worked on cars. He went to work, he did his job, he fixed cars,
Mhm.
he left and he came home. Never once did my dad ever say, like, "Oh, I felt seen and heard at work." Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
My dad was the one, Jonathan, that you were like, "Tell me your feelings." And he'd be like, "I worked on the car."
Yeah.
No, tell me your feelings. And he would be that one kind of having this miss. So you mentioned with industries, right? That some of these industries, along with some of the generations, right? There is this disconnect with being able to be open and share. And so how do the two of you tackle that when maybe it's just very much the industry, very much the engineer, right? That you said that's used to not even talking to anybody. They're used to being
Yeah.
on their computer and doing their thing and not even
Mhm.
talking, let alone
Mhm.
talking about feelings. How does that shift or change or challenge you when it's the industry and that particular space of the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. I'd love to hear Amy answer this as well. I mostly like they'll push back a lot at the start.
Yeah.
Like, coaching's dumb or what do you hear? Or like it's got a whiff of the remedial to it sometimes, like somehow they've failed and now they have got a coach. Like, no, it's not what this about at all. But like that's what's going on in their head. So I try to kind of like pull away from that. They'll push back, and that's because everything in their life that got them to where they got to didn't need any of this,
Mm.
but they're banging into some problems. A new generation at the workforce, human resources, and the rules are changing. Just the actual rules, whether it's be from the wrong kinds of jokes or just inappropriate how you show up, and so all of those sorts of things get thrown into the mix. It turns out they're actually a bit scared.
Mm.
They're pretty fearful, so they tend to turtle and or they sequester themselves.
Mm.
And look, yes, often men, but not exclusively so.
Mhm.
I usually try to break through that. Like, I'm like, okay, so fair enough, but how's it working out for you?
Mhm.
Like, I'm usually quite hard hitting in those moments
Mhm.
because I'm like, it's clearly not working. You've got people that are upset and they're filing complaints about you, or you're not getting the results you want at work. Your turnover is too high. And so I'm sitting here. So you can blame them if you want, but that's what you've been doing and it's not working. So shall we change? And I
Mhm.
usually hit them hard. Mostly, we can kind of get there, but it does come to a point. I don't know. Amy, what do
Yeah.
you find?
Yeah, I agree. You have to really break them through that resistance, and resistance is fear based. And if you think of fear as an energy, it constricts, right? It holds people back, and so
Yes.
so I usually go and I'll explain sometimes visually, especially to those analytical personalities that love to just really visualize and have the
Mm,
steps, go through the David Hawkins energy range, and show them like this is how you're being and showing up.
Mhm.
And so what is that getting? Guilt, shame, fear, anxiety, those are all down here. But if we expand up here and we start to transform, and the point of transformation is always courage, and then that flips
Mhm.
us into the ability to really see, oh, wait a minute, I can be joy. Not just feel joy and get joy. It's not about what I get, it's how I'm going to lead it. Then we get up to that spot. So in my world, because people come to me to solve some sort of major life breakdown that they're usually in. And it usually takes them that major life breakdown to even reach out to someone like me.
Mhm.
And so that over time, I hope changes where people feel like they can reach out sooner. But oftentimes it's like, hey, I've been to therapy and this isn't working.
Mm.
I need,
mm,
I know that there's something else. I just don't know what, and so that's a good sign of when people want to actually change. But to your point, if they're being appointed a coach, in a performance type of situation, the corporate environment, I mean, yeah, there's just a lot of resistance there. So
Mhm.
you got to just be really direct and like just, make them see and admit to what is not working in their life.
Yeah. And
yeah.
with the work that you both are doing, how are companies usually finding you? Is it through word of mouth and other connections? How are they actually landing you for the support that they need?
So I'll answer my end. So I do a lot of speaking in that
Hmm.
arena. So it's, being just, connected, referrals,
Hmm.
being in the well-being space and speaking on the topics that I do.
Hmm.
Yeah, for me, it's a lot of referrals.
Yeah.
I've just kind of been doing this a while now, and I have a network of people. And my favorite thing is when the phone rings or an email, and it says, "I have a Jonathan problem." That's that's when I get
Yes.
like I feel like the brand has sunk in, and I'm like doing well. When
Yes.
people attach, like when they think about me as somebody that can help them through something that's really hard.
Yeah.
And I really I get a lot of joy, to use that word,
Yeah.
from being able to serve people when they're really struggling with something that's difficult at work. And
Mhm.
so yeah, for me it's mostly inbound. I love talking about this stuff, so I do lots of podcasts, and
Yeah.
I have a decent LinkedIn game, but mostly it's just
Yeah.
friends of clients and that kind of thing.
And when they reach out and there's referrals made and there's the email that says, either I connect Amy and you with people, or that email that says it's a Jonathan problem that they need help. Are there, if you were to share with your community and your friends, hey, this is what I do, and here's maybe the signs that lead up to it.
Mhm.
Are there pieces or signs that folks can keep an eye out for, to look for, to then know when it is time for Amy and Jonathan? And let me add a piece to that. I ask this because obviously Culture Crush as a business, we are a hub of resources for improving company culture. And so, really, what we do is we help build thriving people by building thriving cultures by making the connections to the experts that are out there. When I first started this business, my family was like, "Yeah, but why don't you do it?" I'm like, well, first off, now we have 250 partners. I'm not starting 250 businesses.
Mm.
That sounds horrible. Why don't I bring the ones in that are already doing it? You're already the expert in your space. Where I do thrive is by being able to look at the big picture and start to see the signs and then go, oh, you think it's DEI. It's actually this.
Mm.
Or you think it's process improvement. It's actually this, right? And so my question to you of what are these signs and these hints and these moments, they may not come across as a company saying, "Hey Amy, we
Mhm.
need you to do some training on psychological safety in the workplace." Or, "Hey Jonathan, we have a leader that's new in their position and we really want to help support them in the space of psychological safety." If that term is not even coming up in conversation, what are the things that you're seeing, that you're noting, that your community
Mhm.
and our Culture Crush community can keep their eyes open for? And then we can go, ooh, that's where we need Jonathan and Amy. What are those
Mm.
pieces?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that leadership can be really lonely. And I think when leaders feel alone, that's when it's because there's some big problem or some big change that they have to deal with. Or, okay, so like, why this change and why this problem?
Mhm.
The lens is because you're alone with it. Like, there's only so much you can tell your spouse when you get home. There's only so much you can tell your employees and not freak them out.
Mhm.
There's only so much you can tell your investors or your board of directors and not worry them. And so, what do you do with it? Well, you screw the lid on the jar
Yeah. Yeah.
until the pressure mounts. And so, you know, I am often sent people or connected with people because a really good friend of theirs sees what's going on. And they say, you should maybe talk to Jonathan, because I know that seems really big, really hard, letting that long-standing employee go, getting out of that line of business, getting your company ready for sale, getting a succession plan in place, some big inflection point, some hard thing that's going on, and you seem stuck and you seem alone. Let's connect you with Jonathan. That for me, they're the things that, having done this now for almost 3 years, I think that's the common thing that I see the most.
Beautiful.
I would say for me, I've coached a lot of, coming from sales, you can imagine. I mean, that's a whole industry. So I coach a lot of people in that type of industry, and they're leaders that are very caring. Those Leaders will be the ones that can see, you know what, there's something underneath
Mm.
the roller coaster of performance, or this
Mm.
performer did so well, but we know that they still have really great potential in these accounts. But there's got to be something off. We're not really sure what,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Or companies that are going through, and maybe it's a younger company where they've got a lot of people coming in and out of caregiver leave, caregiver and parental leave. Those
Mm.
are big. Divorce is another one. Those are all big life shifts that really can be stressful on people, and it can
Mm.
show up in the workplace.
I'm glad that you mentioned this and you mention these big shifts.
Mhm.
Um, I want to continue in that piece because culture, right? We've talked about culture as far as safety and sharing. And then there's these moments of life events
Mhm.
where sometimes you're provided time off, sometimes you're not provided time off. It's adding to these layers, right?
Mhm.
Jonathan, you said it. These, you just put it in the jar and you close the lid and you're like, not going to talk to it. I'm just going to go do my job. But there's pieces,
Mhm.
right? I don't necessarily have a question behind this. I just want to dig a little deeper in this when it comes to leave and the support that the company can provide. And maybe, Amy, you can bring in some of your experience with being on maternity leave and then coming back. I just want to dive into this piece of how it connects with company culture and the
Mhm.
psychological safety piece that we're talking about.
Well, anytime, an employee is moving, you run the risk of attrition,
Hmm.
right? And so if you're just looking at bottom line numbers, how are we going to measure this? What's really impactful? Performance is obviously a number, but attrition is a huge number, right? If we have to replace an employee at 2 times their salary, that gets pretty expensive pretty fast. And so I think that's something that, people need to track. Obviously, they are tracking usually. And so then if there's a lot of movement there,
Hmm.
and they're not seeing people come back for some reason, maybe they don't have a long enough leave policy, or 70% of employees right now are caregivers of some kind. We
Mm.
have a lot of sandwich generation people that are caring for their own kids and their parents,
Oh, yes.
you know?
Hmm. Jonathan, what are
Yeah.
your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, really true on the sandwich generation.
Hmm.
My dad lives with me downstairs. I've got my eldest is autistic and they're 20. And I think I'm pretty normal. I think lots of people have got multiple generations living in the same house, and that creates all kinds of caregiving pressures.
Yeah.
And so, just an additional layer of context for how work is changing and how the workplace is changing. I think this all feeds into it. I'll share with you, a context as a coach. I coach right across North America, and sometimes I have a Canadian sensibility for things. And, I've got like aspiring entrepreneurs that are deep into corporate culture in America and they want to jump and start the thing. And they say to me, I can't because I won't be able to afford healthcare.
Mm.
And I keep, I'm blind to that because, like
Yeah.
high health. I don't want to get political, by the way, but like
Hmm.
here I am in Canada, like our maternity leave and paternity leave is 18 months.
Mhm.
And so it's a completely different set of circumstances here.
Yeah.
And I've learned to not do that when I do my coaching because I've stepped in it one too many times. So I think that like these are larger systems than just a single company. And it
Mhm.
can feel, there's things you can do with policy and you can be more generous. And B Corps, especially, have been really creative, like 4-day work weeks and unlimited holidays. All of that helps. But, probably what Amy's thinking about is the same thing I am, which is like, and yet, if it's not a well workplace, you can give them all the vacation they want and they won't take it. Or if it's
Yeah.
not a well
Yeah.
workplace, you know what they'll do on Fridays? They'll think, great, I can secretly get my work done.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And they'll just work on Fridays and Saturdays. I think a lot of things actually come back to the kind of culture that you've got before any of these other pieces, tracking HR kind of metric stuff, can improve.
Mhm.
To me, it's relational and it comes back to those sorts of things.
And I think understanding, to your point, understanding what people are going through, go
Yes.
have coffee
Yes.
with someone. If
Right.
you're not part of that sandwich generation and you're not sure, like go take someone out to coffee and understand what they're going through.
Mhm.
Parenting and then also an aging parent. I mean, there's a lot of demands there.
Mhm.
So if you're leading a team of people, get to know their real life because let's humanize the workplace versus just
Mm,
putting butts in seats, you know?
totally.
It goes
Amy,
back
I
to
can I Amy, can I ask you a question
Yeah.
before? It's when you were telling your personal story,
Mm.
I was struck when you just openly talked about, and I got laid off from this big firm.
Yeah.
Something has changed that allows people to be able to say the hard thing that happened to them aloud now. I don't know when exactly that changed, but I've noticed myself talking about things that previously were private
Yeah.
that I will now bring up.
Yeah.
And when did that change for you? Like, what do you think happened? Like, why did you allow yourself to actually kind of like publicly say, no, that's my strong and I own that?
It's such a blessing because I mean, I wrote a book, my first book. I'm writing my next one, Resilient Growth, but my first book, Leading Motherhood, was all about surrendering to faith over fear from the delivery room to boardroom. And in that, I openly talk about my faith journey. I openly talk about overcoming CPTSD after a birth trauma, like really deep personal stuff. And the
Yes.
reason why I felt so inclined to do that was because, what I said, I have one shot to be a founder right now. I have one opportunity to get this right. And so it really was definitely for me very spiritually led in that I knew I wanted to shine the light brightly. And I knew that there
Mm,
was a lot of women just like me suffering in silence and suffering in just feeling alone and isolated after trauma, because that's what trauma does to you. So I said, you know what? I'm not going back to my old career. Logically, that would make a lot of sense. My husband probably would be really happy about that, but but I'm going to stick to my guns and keep learning, and so that's how I got certified and did all the things I'm doing now. I do
mm,
somatic work. I just did a somatic experience and exercise with a client this morning. I mean, like way different, right?
Mhm.
But it was because I knew I wanted to help wrap everybody in that big warm blankie and let them know it's going to be okay. You can get through this and we can heal together. And the world really just seemed like it needed that at that time over the last
Mhm.
oh,
few
that's really
years.
powerful.
Yeah.
Thank you for
That's a
sharing.
Mm.
great question, Jonathan, because it's tied to having people like yourself that are
Mm.
willing to risk it and say, "Hey, I'm going to tell my story so that I can help others."
Yeah.
I think part of it too, COVID did that. I mean, we were on Zoom
Mm,
calls. You saw everything inside somebody's house. You could no longer
Yeah.
have that separation and pretend like, oh, I'm at work. I don't talk about my kids.
Mhm.
Now I'm at home and I have my kids. Like everything was there. You've seen everyone's living rooms and bedrooms and dogs. And I've seen so
yeah.
many cats and their little bums walk across computers. I'm like, I've literally seen everything in your house now.
Yeah.
And so then to go back after that, there's only so much you can hide at that point, right? And so I
Yeah.
think it's a combination of that happening to the world
Mhm.
and then leaders like you being able to stand up. And then I'll say there's other advocates out there too. I know with us, when we're putting on events, one of the big things that we have said to our community is we want to remove the barrier that's blocking you from coming to this event. Is it an ASL interpreter that you need? Then we have one.
Mhm.
Is it that you're a single dad and you need to bring the kiddo? Then bring the kiddo. Amy has her kiddo here today and I
Yeah.
just love it, right? There's no more of this business side of Amy, parent of Amy, business side, it's all kind of meshed in. And I am very thankful to people like you for being able to just be raw and open. And then you set the stage for everyone else to feel like they can be raw and open as well about everything.
Well, psychological safety is our topic today, and leaders can't create that unless they feel psychologically safe.
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of leaders that just maybe never were felt like they could be safe, or maybe they just never, just again, they just never had that opportunity to really feel it themselves. So how in the world are they going to create a culture of safety? So we have to just continue to, I think, be vulnerable,
Hmm.
create connection, and I think that's how we're going to cause change.
I love that. And I think this is a beautiful way to start to wrap up. So, I have one last question that I want to ask both of you real quick. it just came to me looking at Jonathan on the Zoom, right? You have your company name there. And I'm like, oh, I love both of your company names. And I feel like it ties into what you do. So really, I just want to know, and then I'll give you a moment to say any last thoughts, but I want to know how you named your business, both of you. So Jonathan, yours is called Clearly Then. And Amy, yours is Resilient Growth. Obviously, there's meaning to this. So real quick as we wrap up, Jonathan, how'd you name your business this?
Mine's a little bit whimsical, but it does have a meaning.
Okay.
So I have an English degree, as does my wife. And a very, very long time ago, we were taking our undergraduates together and we would be writing a lot of essays. And we would be like looking at the other one to see when we were finished so we could go out for the night. It became shorthand to say, where are you at? Oh, I'm at clearly, comma, then, comma, which was I'm at the beginning of the last paragraph. And so over the course of our life, it would come up. We would be like, basically as a shorthand for are you almost done was I'm at clearly, comma, then, comma. So when this kind of came up for me, it was kind of like, I feel like I'm kind of like beginning the last paragraph of my work. And also I love the fact that, it sort of sounds emphatic. Like I help people solve problems. And so like clearly then let's get on with it. Right.
Yes.
So yeah.
Oh, I love that. Oh, I'm so glad I asked that. I love the behind the scenes story on it. Amy, how did you name your company Resilient Growth?
Yeah, it was really outcomes based on my clients. So, my transformational coaching is kind of like executive coaching meets life coaching and throw in some holistic health in there. And so I was like, how in the world, how do I explain this to people? And so I went back and interviewed some clients and I was like, oh, this is it, resilience. It was these women that were going through 12 rounds of IVF therapy and trying to figure out their next career move in the C-suite. It was these women that were in the C-suite going, I think I want kids. I don't know how I'm going to do all of this. Or it was leaders that were just like, I am burned out. I know there's a different way and I don't know how to do all this without burning down my personal life, And so I'm like, it's resilience because when we grow that emotional and physical resilience, we can really overcome any adversity.
Beautiful. I love that. As we wrap up, I want to give each of you just a quick moment. If there is something that's in your brain that you're like, oh, I really wanted to say this, then say it. If there is an update or anything going on that you want to share, please share. So I want to give Jonathan, I want to give you one last moment before we wrap up. Whatever you want to share.
Well, just that this has been a real pleasure. I would just invite anybody listening to this, if they want to get in touch. I'm a real human. I actually answer emails and DMs. And I spend, usually an hour with folks getting to know people. So if you want to come and find out about my work and find out about me, feel free to reach out and book some time with me. I'd love to meet you.
Awesome. And when they are looking to reach out and find you, what's the best place for them to reach out and find you?
Yeah, right on my website, which is clearlythen.com. I'm also on LinkedIn way too much. So you can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Beautiful. Amy, what are some of your last thoughts for all of this?
Oh, my last thought is whenever you feel fear or anxiety, you can choose courage to really shift off of that. And this is very timely. If any of you have not seen Inside Out 2, you have to go watch it because it's all about anxiety.
Oh, I've heard this a few times. Now I must go to the movies.
So good. Yeah, for any of us, any of you that like emotional intelligence stuff, it's a great movie. Oh. But yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm also a real human, and it's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Kendra.
I love it. And is LinkedIn the best place for folks to reach you?
Yeah, LinkedIn or my website, Amy Lee, LEIGH, and I'm also on YouTube. So lots of, if you're looking for quick, tips, just, go dive into some content. There's a lot there.
Awesome. And then one last thing before I give my last few thoughts. Again, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Gateway Bank. We're going to play a quick message about them.
Remember when your banker knew you and cared about you? This experience still exists at Gateway Bank, the only community bank in Mesa, Arizona, serving customers Valley and nationwide. With Gateway, you get the fast personal service of a small bank with the convenience, security, and stability of a large one. Whether you need a loan or banking services for your business, they're here for you. Visit gcbaz.com/Culture Crush for details and a free consultation with Gateway President James Christensen.
And they have truly been fantastic. I wasn't planning on sharing this, but that's the best part about this conversation is it just goes where we want it to go. Culture Crush Business, we have a partnership with State 48, and we have a t-shirt that's coming out. And so my team and I, we've been so excited. I probably preemptively shot it out on social media and it was like, I got to share the link. And through that whole process, one of the very first people to buy the t-shirt was James Christensen, who's the president of Gateway Bank. He is a real human. He comes to our events, he shows up in Converse, and he bought one of the shirts first. So when it comes to partnerships and sponsorships, it's so important to align with those that align with you. We're not just partnering for money, we're partnering for purpose. And that's really what Gateway Bank does. So they've been absolutely fantastic. So thank you to them. And then again, thank you for listening to another episode of the Culture Crush Business Podcast. It all started as a podcast. It's no longer just a podcast. We are your hub for company culture resources. So we go in with our culture insights and our years of expertise. We evaluate the companies and we really, truly, intentionally match with the resources that are out there to go in and be the experts in those spaces. And today was an example of two of those beautiful experts with Amy and Jonathan. So again, thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Culture Crush, the only podcast out there that does a deep dive of companies that are crushing it with a great company culture. If you think your company has a strong culture that should be highlighted, please reach out to Kendra Maples on LinkedIn or email us at culturecrushpodcast@gmail.com.